Hello and welcome to the Fantasy Life Show. Happy Tuesday, and oh my gosh, week one, everybody. We have made it. It is truly a great day to be great. And I'm your host, Ian Hartitz, here to help you guys, hopefully finally win those fantasy championships, get off on the right foot because the drafts are mostly in the books at this point. And of course, the man by my side, helping us all accomplish this task, the one, the only, Dwain, the Rock McFarland. Dwain, happy week one.
What's up, man? Happy week one. I feel like I just saw you. Oh, that's right, because we were up late drafting just trying to squeeze in two more fantasy squads last night over on Real Time Sports. So yeah, I feel like we kind of have brain meld at this point. So we'll see if we have any differing opinions this morning.
I'm at 37 managed leagues this year, which again, apologies to my family and friends. What's your number, Dwayne?
I am below that. Like 23, 24, I would say. No, I'm over that. I'm probably like at 25.
Certain numbers are good to lie about in your lives, and I think the number of fantasy leagues you're in is probably one of them. So I'm going to put that one down there a little bit when I'm telling the rest of the fam. But yeah, either way, guys, a lot to talk about today. Some news. We got some pre-utilization questions going on. Again, loaded, jam-packed show. But first, a quick word on Fantasy Life Plus. Guys, Fantasy Life Plus, we've helped you get your drafts in the right spot, but now we're also here to help you on a week-to-week basis with waiver wires, with player rankings, with those pesky start-sit decisions, all that and so much more at your fingertips, and has made as easy as possible with Fantasy Life Plus. So check it out, again, for the low cost of freaking under $10 a month, even for our Tier 2 package, under $40 a year for our Tier 1. So not trying to break your bank, just trying to help you hopefully break your friends and family's banks as you go win those fantasy championships. So Fantasy Life Plus, check it out. All right, Dwayne, haven't been together since Friday, so we've had quite a bit of news go down over Labor Day weekend. Primarily, a little bit of a shakeup in the Chiefs' backfield. We do have Clyde Edwards-Helaire now on the NFI list. He is continuing to deal with some of that PTSD. So get better soon, Clyde Edwards-Helaire. But now, Dwayne, we do have some new competition emerging in the form of ex-Bengals and Broncos running back Samaje Perine getting an awful lot of hype in the fantasy streets. So how do you see this committee looking with Isaiah Pacheco as the starter, Perine now in there, presumably as the RB2, and preseason superstar Carson Steele?
Yeah, I think when we look at Pacheco, like I've not changed anything. I've seen some people I respect in the industry like really worried about Perine, but here's the thing. Clyde Edwards-Helaire could do all the things that they're going to ask Perine to do. So I was already giving some of that work to Edwards-Helaire. Now I've just essentially swapped in Samaje Perine. Perine's really good, Ian, on third down and long. He's a guy you can bring in. He's going to pick up the blitz. He's going to know his assignments. I wouldn't doubt it at all if they pull Pacheco off the field and give those snaps to Samaje Perine. But guess what, folks? You're mostly blocking in that situation. It's long down and distance. You got man coverage. You're getting a blitz. The running back's not catching a ball. Like they are blocking. They are the last resort. As far as getting a target in that situation. What we'll need to monitor, though, is whether or not Samaje Perine takes over the 2-minute offense away from Isaiah Pacheco, because that does matter. That's your drive at the end of the half or at the end of a game. You're trying to get in a field goal position or you're trying to get down and score points. Well, what's the defense doing? They're putting their safeties deep. They're not letting you hit a big pass, especially with a team like the Chiefs. They're going to be trying to take that away, knowing that you've got Xavier Worthy. Eventually, we get Marquise Brown back in the picture. They're going to be trying to stop that big play. And so that can equal a lot of checkdowns to whoever's on the field. So that's the one thing we're going to have to monitor. I think there is some slight risk there because Samaje Perine's been really good in that role in the past. Clyde Edwards-Helaire's been functional in that role. I would say Perine's been better than CEH. So we'll have to watch that one. But for now, I'm trying not to overreact. I thought that Pacheco showed, the ability to do those sort of things. Again, fine. They want to take some hits off of his body against a blitzer. We're okay with that in fantasy.
Yeah, and look, I understand the idea that, look at what Jerick McKinnon was able to do over these few years. Now you presumably bring in Perine to that role. But I'm with you, Dwayne. To me, this feels far more like CEH insurance than necessarily bringing in a guy that is going to be taking all these touches away from Isaiah Pacheco. So, yeah, everyone, as much as we would love for every single NFL depth chart to just have one running back and nobody else to deal with, they do need to fill out that depth. And for Samaje Perine, he is someone they can trust in those, long down and distance situations. Dwayne, you mentioned the 2 minute numbers. I mean, my God, last year, Piron, NFL high 30 receptions and 240 receiving yards with under 2 minutes on the clock. I mean, the next closest running back was 15 catches and 142 yards. So as much as we can cite, Piron's pass blocking, and hey, he did lead all running backs in yards per route run last year. If you do take away some of those easier check down, deep safety, 2-minute situations, that yards per route run number goes down to 1.59. Clyde Edwards-Helaire just below him at 1.53. So yes, Piron is good, but you know what? When he can't make the roster for maybe one of the worst offenses in football in Denver, not thinking he's exactly going to be jacking, Isaiah Pacheco's job. I say that, Dwayne, only for Twitter to absolutely melt down if Piron takes the first snap here on Thursday night. So we'll see what happens. Yeah. We actually, Dwayne, we haven't been drafting Pacheco in round 2, so I'm not trying to say that he's, completely golden. But again, for me, far more CEH, insurance than anything here.
Yeah, so this weekend, I had Pacheco fall to me in round 4 of a draft because of this news, and so I finally got a Pacheco share. To your point, I haven't been taking him in round 2, so it worked out from that perspective. I will say we've already been cautious with Pacheco, so maybe that's why, we like him, but we've also been a little bit cautious. We've said, hey, he's going in round 2 of fantasy drafts. We like him in round 3. So we were already kind of baking some of this stuff in. So not to repeat myself here, but I kind of see CEH's role very similar to what Samaje Piron's is going to be. So if you loved Pacheco before, I don't think there's enough here to suddenly just be out on him. There's always been the risk that he wouldn't get all the passing down work. That's always been a risk. Last year when him and CEH played in games together, guess who got the passing down work? CEH. So we were already kind of projecting that.
Other big news item from the weekend is while there are a lot of happy, holdout guys who have now gotten their new contracts, Jamar Chase is not one of them. Still not practicing, Dwayne, and we are now officially in game week. So we got the Patriots in week 1, a big game in Arrowhead for the Bengals in week 2. Jamar Chase right now, for anyone else out there, Dwayne, that hasn't completed their fantasy draft yet, you still comfortable taking him as a top 8 pick?
I think the closer we get, the more you're just going to move him down in tiebreakers, right? So, I mean, we've already said that he was outside the top 6 based on this information, which means you're taking him after Justin Jefferson at this point. Then you've got Amon-Ra St. Brown on the list, Ian. I'm fine just taking Amon-Ra. Do I think Jamar Chase, if fully healthy, is the player with the higher ceiling than Amon-Ra? Yeah. But, I mean, Amon-Ra could also beat Justin Jefferson in any healthy year. So I think once you get to that situation, I'm leaning to the sun god at this point over Jamar Chase. And then I think is where it gets interesting. And this is where I'd like your thoughts, because you get to A.J. Brown, and then you get to Garrett Wilson. And so if you're thinking receiver, now you might be thinking JT as well. You might be thinking Jonathan Taylor. He's pretty locked into a full workload this season. So if you're thinking of him at the end of round 1, those are really the 3 players for me where it gets really interesting. So I could go Garrett Wilson. I honestly could. I'm a gambler, though. I'm probably taking Chase. But I have gamble in me. I'm probably taking Chase over Amon-Ra St. Brown. But it all depends on how you want to approach your fantasy season and what makes you the most comfortable. And so if you don't like that uncertainty in week 1, I'm the kind of guy hey, fine. If you guys want to pass him once he's on the field in week 3, I'll take what I get. But again, there's other really good players there. And I've already written up in my bold predictions, Garrett Wilson having the skill set to be the wide receiver 1 overall in fantasy football. So I don't blame anyone that takes Wilson. How about you?
It's certainly not egregious. That said, Dwayne, I was in one of my OG home leagues over this weekend, had the chance, I believe, at the 110 in the first round. And yeah, I was fine taking Jamar Chase still at that point. So certainly, not going to fault anyone for those tiebreaker situations, but certainly wouldn't also have the guy on my do not draft list because as we've seen with Brandon Ayuk, as we've seen with every single player that has been threatening a holdout, the situation usually gets resolved. So I understand the history with the Bengals being a bit more on the cheaper side of the NFL franchises, but at the same time, everyone, there still is time before week 1 to get done. And just when it comes down to it, Dwayne, the most realistic scenario for me is Jamar Chase getting his game checks once it does come time to go out there and suit up. So could be annoying. I wish he was already practicing, but for what it's worth, he has still been attending all the practices, just again, waiting until he gets paid to actually get the shoulder pads on. So last quick thing here, Dwayne, if we do actually see Jamar Chase out of the picture, is that automatically making T. Higgins a wide receiver 1, top 12 ahead of this week 1 matchup against New England?
I mean, he's a borderline wide receiver 1. Yeah, if Jamar Chase is out. We've seen it in these games without Chase. T. Higgins is struggled over the last couple of years when you have Chase on the field to really, find a way to still shine. But he has shown in those games without Chase that Joe Burrow is very willing to go to him. And Joe Burrow is just one of these guys, Ian. He can vibe with anybody if they're skilled. So, yeah, I would say Higgins would be a borderline wide receiver 1. I have a question for you, Hartitz. What would you put the percentage chance at that Jamar Chase misses over 4 games. If you Girl Scout saunters to the door, you got to give an answer. Your life is on the line here.
0. I think he misses at the absolute most 1. And I'd say even, I think there's like a 75% chance he's going to be out there this Sunday. How about you?
Yeah, I'm the same way. Just the game checks cost so much, and he still has 2 years left on the deal. Yeah. So, he definitely can't press it really far into the season just because he wants his contract, to toll. He wants to be able to get credit for this season so that he actually can be in his 5th year of his deal. Otherwise, if not, the Bengals are going to control 2 more years. So theoretically, he could push that all the way to the limit, but it would be really costly for him. Now, we have no clue. Does his agent come to him and say, "Man, I got you. We'll cover that out of our firm because we're going to make it." At some point, that also can't be feasible for the agent, even if he signs a deal Justin Jefferson size. Once you start adding up what those game checks are going to come to.
And I understand the rebuttal. Oh, but guys, Jamar Chase skipped an entire season at LSU. It was also the COVID season, and also Joe Burrow had left, and also he had all the agents in the world telling him you're going to be a top 5 pick, even if you don't play another collegiate snap. So slightly different situations. I think we can
different math equation there, guys.
Yeah. Exactly. One thing versus the other, X versus Y. But yeah, Jamar Chase, long story short, please get that contract signed, get out there and keep on scoring fantasy points. Guys, quick little rapid recap again for the rest of some fantasy news over the weekend. First of all, the other 49ers holdout, Trent Williams, reportedly has signed an extension or is about to, should be out there for Monday night's matchup against the Jets. So all of a sudden, the 49ers offense, all parties on deck, looking strong per usual. Marquise Brown, the only player missing from Chiefs practice. Andy Reid has already come out and told us he is likely to miss week 1, but with that shoulder injury, hopefully back in week 2 or week 3 before too long either way. Also, no Ravens starters on the injury report. Good news in particular from Mark Andrews, who obviously had that car crash a couple weeks ago. He was back on the practice field last Friday, so all hands on deck for that exciting Thursday night matchup. Tyreek Hill stays 100% healthy entering week 1, and head coach Mike McDaniel confirmed both Tyreek and Jalen Waddle are good to go. No setbacks. Again, more good news as we get ahead into week 1. Also sounds like Jahmyr Gibbs and that hamstring injury, not a concern per head coach Dan Campbell. One concern, though, is rookie 49ers wide receiver Ricky Pearsall. As you guys have, inevitably already heard, he did get shot over the weekend, and he is now on the non-football injury list. So going to be missing at least 4 games here. Get better soon, Ricky. Incredibly scary situation there. So luckily, as good as you can be after getting shot, he is, stable and doing better. So get better soon, Ricky. Marshawn Lloyd also back at practice with that hamstring injury, even if he's still limited. Again, good news that he was able to avoid the PUP list at all to start the season. The Colts worked out Leonard Fournette. We'll see what happens there. Ravens brought back former Pro Bowl quarterback Tyler Huntley after he got cut from the Browns. Free agent wide receiver Michael Thomas suspended 1 game. Yeah, he's a free agent, so you weren't exactly, even considering playing him anyway, but always funny when that happens. Also, Russell Wilson and Caleb Williams named team captains, and the most relevant news overall, the Seahawks are rocking their BEA beautiful 90s era throwbacks in week 1, one of the hottest throwback alternate uniforms in the game. So love seeing that, and love seeing some of the things that our good friends over at Paramount Plus have going on as well. Guys, you won't miss a minute of the action when you stream the NFL on CBS Live on Paramount Plus. Stream every local, national, and postseason NFL game on CBS Live all the way through the AFC Championship on Paramount Plus. Download Paramount Plus today to start your free trial and unlock a season of epic moments, including all of your local Week 1 games, only at Paramount Plus. Oh yeah, we're sheeshing. Presented by Mike's Hard Lemonade. Now, Dwayne, this time next week, we're going to have a lot of opportunities to talk about some of the tilting near-miss sheesh caliber moments that go on over the course of a weekend, but obviously no football to break down just yet. But still, when we're, having to relive our fantasy nightmares, we do actually learn some stuff from them. I'm not just trying to piss off everyone. So I want to go through another one of the leaderboards and just kind of describe again some of the takeaways from it, specifically unrealized air yards. So for those that have never heard of this statistic, when we're talking about air yards, first of all, that is just a distance from a quarterback throwing it to a wide receiver that the ball travels in the air. Unrealized air yards is just when we're measuring, again, that distance from a quarterback throwing the ball to a wide receiver on incomplete targets only. So when we see someone catch only 2 of 9 targets for 20 yards, we look at that box score and we say, well, that wasn't anything to write home about. But guess what? If they are open for 6 bombs, downfield and they have 200 plus unrealized air yards, yards. I think Olave one time even got over 300 when he had Jameis out there. Again, it just helps show us that in future weeks, they have the opportunity. So with a bit more, luck or even just chemistry between the quarterback and wide receiver, better things could be on the horizon down the road. So looking at last year's leaderboard, Dwain, 4 in most unrealized air yards, 5 wide receivers had over 1,000. In first place was DeAndre Hopkins. Right behind him, Chris Olave, Devontae Adams, Calvin Ridley, and Garrett Wilson rounding out the top 5. Then after those guys, we had Mike Evans, Stephon Diggs, Terry McLaurin, A.J. Brown, and DK Metcalf rounding out the top 10. So I want to stress it's not all on the quarterback. Again, a drop is going to count the same here, just as, an overthrown deep ball and everything. But still, I would say generally, Dwayne, a lot of these guys, we can't point, the finger a little bit more at the quarterback at hand. Luckily, though, 5 of these players do, in fact, have a new quarterback. Devontae Adams, Calvin Ridley, Garrett Wilson, Stephon Diggs, and Terry McLaurin. So want to focus a bit more on these guys. And starting off, Dwayne, someone that I don't think you and I have drafted once, but man, oh man, should he still get a lot of targets. Devontae Adams. Overall confidence level, and Gardner Minshew may be giving Devontae a better experience than what we saw last year from Jimmy G and Aiden O'Connell.
Not really that high. I kind of feel like it's the same thing that we already had. We have seen a season where Gardner Minshew almost threw for 250 yards per game, back in his early days when we had Minshew mania in Jacksonville. So I'm not saying that it's not maybe lurking somewhere underneath the surface there. I think he's definitely a better, manager of the pocket than Jimmy G. He's willing to stand in there and buy that one extra beat and take a hit, something that Jimmy G really, falling off the back foot. Like Jimmy G's like trying to get the hell out of there. So I don't think you're going to have to worry about that. So maybe there's a slight advantage. And we can say you had another player like that in Aiden O'Connell last year. And once he got in the game and was also willing to do that, Aiden O'Connell took his fair share of big hits. He was delivering the ball to Devontae Adams. So if you look at those splits with Aiden O'Connell versus what you had earlier in the season with Jimmy Garoppolo, it was pretty good with Aiden O'Connell, considering you had an offense that we were basically praying like they could throw for over 200 yards in a game, and you had Devontae Adams playing hurt towards the end of the year. So yeah, I think that there's some potential here. It's not one that I'm going to get overly excited about though, because it's look, we like Gardner Minshew. He's an NFL starting quarterback, but he's not exactly a guy that, like, if we were starting a franchise today, we would be thinking of as anything more than a backup for our roster.
Last year, if you want to look at completion percentage over expected, among 32 qualified quarterbacks, the 2 worst, Aiden O'Connell and, yes, Gardner Minshew. So I know he had the Colts, very close to getting in the playoffs. They were able to still be a top 10 scoring offense. Not saying he can't, be a top 30 NFL quarterback, but certainly think at this point we know he is a bit closer to 30 than number 1. Dwayne, Calvin Ridley, someone who, again, maybe had a bit more of this problem going to himself with the drops that we saw from Trevor Lawrence, now residing in Tennessee. 92 million reasons why the Titans should be feeding him the football. That said, our number 1 wide receiver on the unrealized air yards leaderboard was DeAndre Hopkins. And yeah, now we have Calvin Ridley in town as well. So the Will Levis experience, a lot of fun to watch for better, and let's face it, mostly worse, at least through 1 year. Thoughts on Ridley potentially having, the sort of season that many expected him to have last year in his first season back from the gambling suspension?
Yeah, I think his unrealized air yards could actually go up, with Will Levis. But the point being, the reason why air yards matter and why we care about them, you did a great job of explaining, what they are, is they correlate highly to future fantasy points the next season. They're one of our best indicators. So they tell us about intent, the intent of the quarterback to try to get the ball to a certain player. And typically quarterbacks try to get the ball to their best players. And if you don't have a good player on your team, guess what a quarterback does? They just kind of spread it all around. But we've seen with Calvin Ridley, even whenever he's been on some of these other teams with pretty good wide receivers, he does come down with some good air yard numbers. Now, he's never really held up in offenses where he's had another major, where he's had major competition for targets overall. So it's kind of weird, like when you go back and you look at his history, like, has it just been unluck, or is there something really with his skill set there that's holding him back? Because think back to when he had Julio Jones on his team, Ian. Now, he was a rookie at that point. He was okay. Like, he had some definite flashes, but until Julio left, he didn't really have that chance to be a superstar. And then we saw later in his career, even whenever he had that opportunity in Atlanta, now he got hurt, and he also had the year where he got suspended. did. But after that, going to Jacksonville, when you had Christian Kirk in the lineup, like he wasn't doing much. It was after Christian Kirk left the lineup that he started doing something. So my bigger concern here is what you just said, that DeAndre Hopkins was also on this leaderboard. And Hopkins has shown us multiple times in his career that it doesn't matter who's on the team. He's typically going to get his targets. Now, he's an older player. He has a lot of red flags. He's been dealing with injuries. But last year, he played all 17 games. So I think both of these guys are going to have a lot of air yards. It does all come back to the one common denominator that you mentioned. You need a Will Levis improvement similar to what we saw with Josh Allen. Whenever Josh Allen suddenly turned in from being this guy throwing into double covers to a fullback on a wheel route, where we're like going, what is happening here, to turning into this player that could just, hit all layers of the field and turn from like a 57% completion player into someone completing 65% of their passes. We rarely get that. But we've got two examples in recent memory with Josh Allen, and another one was Jalen Hurts, who was not known for being a high accuracy player coming out of college. And now he's pretty good in that department. So Levis is going to have to take that kind of step forward. And I don't think that we can realistically just say it's going to happen. I think we have to lean more towards it not happening, but we can't say it's totally out of the question.
Dwain, double covered fullback on a wheel route in overtime of a playoff game. The Josh Allen experience, hell of a drug, in the pre-20 years. Exactly. I don't think we need to go into Garrett Wilson. Yes, guys, guess what? Going from Zach Wilson to Aaron Rodgers, certainly feeling
he's about to get a huge improvement. Case closed.
Good. Done there. Last one I wanted to go through is Stephon Diggs, someone where, again, we've talked a lot about his first and second half splits. And I'll say, Bills fans out there saw it as much as it was a more run first offense, as much as Diggs might have had his drops or two. Yes, we all saw that just beautiful bomb, against the Chiefs that Diggs couldn't come down with. There were some other examples, man, where Josh Allen was the one that was at fault. I mean, man, Diggs put Jalen Ramsey on absolute roller skates on a double move, wide open for what should have been a 90-yard touchdown in like that week 14 or 15 game. Sadly, though, was overthrown. So I know one of the things you did this offseason, Dwayne, amongst the many awesome articles, was, a more deeper analysis on wide receiver age cliffs and how you found man coverage yards per route run was something that, again, helps show when actual imminent drop-offs are potentially coming here. With Stephon Diggs, and having all these unrealized air yards, were you still seeing him specifically against man coverage have the sort of elite numbers to think, hey, maybe in Houston he can still keep on keeping on as a fantasy football wide receiver one?
Yeah, he had a little bit of a dip in that data, but it was still good. Like his yards per route run were still good. And the other thing with Diggs, like if we were using this sort of data, and I really I reference this like whenever I'm talking about these sort of data points, they're not necessarily predictive. They're just kind of like little things where you're like, okay, like this could be an indicator, but it's not like the data so strong where we're like, oh my God, like if a player has this, you have to be absolutely out on them. I look at it as like it's one data point in multiple things that you're looking at. And it's another thing that if they check negative or positive, like it can help kind of lean you in one direction or the other. But to your point, Stephon Diggs looked like he still had game in that scenario. And the other thing with Diggs is why I don't buy into this is how would he be so good in the first half of last season, Ian? And suddenly he hit an age cliff in the middle of a year and just became a bad player. Like if you had Stephon Diggs on your fantasy team to start last season, here are the wide receiver finishes you got. Week 1 was wide receiver 4. Then you had wide receiver 34, 13, 2, 6, 7, 12, 26. Offense changes to a new coordinator, 46, 46, 14, 45, 35, 45, 48, 17, 16, 17. That includes your playoffs. Again, those were his wide receiver finishes. All you had in the first half of the year was a wide receiver littering the top 12. I am scared to death that I have not clicked on Stephon Diggs enough this offseason. I get it. He's in a loaded passing offense. But man, this passing offense, like if I'm putting odds down on the teams that can go for 5,000 yards passing and get to 40 plus touchdowns through the air, number 1's the Chiefs. I think number 2 is probably the Houston Texans. You might be able to contest that with Joe Burrow if you've got Jamar Chase on the field.
Always funny when Dwayne and I are drafting, and you guys do this as well. You have a certain feeling about a guy, but as soon as you don't get him on your team, all of a sudden you're talking about the negatives with him, and then you get someone later. So we really wanted Patrick Mahomes in round 5, got sniped one pick before, ended up getting, a falling CJ Stroud in round 9, and just immediately there, I think Dwayne hit it with why take Mahomes in round 5 and we can get, exactly, the same 5,000 yard guy all the way down there in round 9. So in all seriousness, though, Stroud and company do have that upside. side. We'll see if Diggs again can just hopefully get back to being the guy that we saw, in the first half of last season. Final quick note on Terry McLaurin and Jaden Daniels. Really can't stress how rough it was at times with Sam Howell. I mean, guys, first 13 games of last year with Sam Howell, Terry's single game high in receiving yards was 90 and only scored 2 touchdowns. When he got 2 drives with Jacoby Brissett in that Rams game, 93 yards, had a touchdown, and got tackled at the 1-yard line another time. So I know DJ Moore has been, kind of the poster child for that sick wide receiver dealing one bad quarterback after another. Terry McLaurin truly not too far behind. So please, fantasy guys, let Jaden Daniels finally give us a sort of wide receiver 1 season from Terry that we know he is capable of. So, all right, guys, good stuff there. And again, we'll have all sorts of, finally relevant sheesh to be going over this time next week. But first, we're getting some utilization goodness. And before that, a quick word with our friends over at Mike's Hard Lemonade. Hey, Fantasy Life fans, let me ask you a question. Was your day hard enough for Mike's Hard Lemonade? Are you in a slow draft that just won't end? Were you one pick away from the perfect quarterback wide receiver stack but got sniped? Living the fantasy life is hard, and Mike's Hard Lemonade is a reward for a hard-earned thirst. Reward yourself today. Go to www.mikeshard.com and find out where you can get Mike's nearest you. Hard days deserve a hard lemonade. Dwayne, similar to the sheesh goodness, next week we're going to have all sorts of utilization takeaways from week 1 action. Before that, I wanted to go through some potential surprises that, again, people might be seeing this time next week. So first things first, though, with the utilization report, the critically acclaimed, world famous utilization report, I should say. What is it exactly, and why is utilization so useful to fantasy football players of all shapes and sizes?
Yeah, so utilization really becomes super important, like once the season gets here. Like when we're in the preseason, we're projecting all these things. Like we are projecting the different roles to get to our projections, which folks can check out over at FantasyLife.com. But once we're in the season, Ian, we are now fully focused on volume. Like volume is absolute king. In the preseason, we're still waiting in, talent. They may not have the role at the beginning of the year. It could take some time. Well, now we're actually getting the real data telling us what the coaches are doing with these players. And what we've done is we've gone back and we've researched all of the different roles you can have. Say, for example, with a running back, Ian, that's a great example. Sometimes you have running backs that are getting all the carries inside the 5-yard line. Well, guess what touches are the most valuable for running backs? Inside the 5, because what are you going to do? You're going to score touchdowns. So if you get a chance to score 6 points whenever you get a carry, obviously it's going to really blow up your expected fantasy points on those carries. The other thing we've already talked about, the 2-minute offense is a very valuable role for running backs. That's how you take, a player like Christian McCaffrey that might be having a bad day. Defenses are playing deep coverage, and suddenly on one drive, he tacks on 10 points right before halftime in a PPR because he's the guy out there getting all those passes underneath the defense. So we quantify all of those different roles. And what's really cool, Ian, is this year, if you don't want to know all that, you're like, I don't care about all that, Dwayne, just tell me which one has the best role. We are going to have a utilization score that takes all those things. We weight them appropriately by each position so folks can understand those things you talk about with wide receiver. Guess what matters a lot? Uncatchable targets versus catchable targets, uncatchable air yards versus catchable air yards. All of those things are baked into one number. And what that will help you do is you can quickly see, this player actually is playing like an A+ talent, but like right now, their fantasy performance is probably like a B or a C. I want to go trade for that player. That's the sort of thing that we're trying to use this information for, or to find a player before your friends do on the waiver wire. We may see a certain running back or receiver starting to trickle up. This happened last year with Rashee Rice. It was one of our biggest waiver wire or trade proposal takeaways that we have from the utilization report. And what we saw in the data was that his route participation was slowly moving upward through the season. He wasn't at a spot where you could put him in your lineup yet, but when he was on the field, his targets per route were elite. They were the best on the Chiefs behind only Travis Kelce. So we told folks, look, guys, he's eventually going to get into the full-time role. There's not any other good receivers on this team. And if we look at what he's doing on his per route basis, that's going to make him a wide receiver 1. Guess what Rashee Rice was for the last stretch of last year, including the NFL playoffs? He was a wide receiver 1. So that was a huge trade that you were able to go after based on the things that you find in the utilization report.
And with that, Dwayne, let's get into some of the, predictions we have going in utilization ahead of 2024. You mentioned Christian McCaffrey really being the poster child of having fantastic utilization. And by the way, breaking news, ESPN's Adam Schefter reports CMC is expected to practice on Tuesday despite having that calf injury. So again, weren't concerned about it, but yeah, good news that the reigning RB1 is going to be back there on the practice field. But Dwayne, maybe we could see a surprising RB1 level utilization phenom in Giants running back Devin Singletary. Really? The artist known as Motor could be out there playing more snaps than not. Crazier things have happened, Dwayne. Devin Singletary, could he again be one of the more surprising workhorses in fantasy here come week 1?
Yeah, with Singletary, look, we've got Tyrone Tracy, who the team drafted in the later rounds. He was really more of a receiver for most of his college career. So those of you familiar with the artist formerly known as Antonio Gibson, maybe is what we would say. It's a similar profile to that. Like, he's an explosive playmaker. He could do some work on passing downs, but he's a raw rookie. So I do think out of the gate, Singletary is going to be getting all of the work, Ian. I think we're talking about a guy that could have like a 75% snap share on week 1. We saw him show the ability to handle that sort of workload last season whenever the Texans really wanted to call on him. Now, I will say, with Singletary, even though we think he's going to have the workload to support like a low-end running back 2 fantasy, that's where he'll probably rank in our fantasy ranks, right there, borderline running back 2 in week 1. I'm working on those today. We have the risk, right, of it being a really bad offense. And we also have the risk of offensive line issues. So this doesn't erase everything, but I do think he is one of the cheapest players that you can find out there that's going to be in a full-time role. The key will be, can he hold on to that, Ian, for the course of the season? Because we have seen teams in the past try to basically find other ways to get their backs involved anytime we thought Devin Singletary was really going to be in a lead role. Last year was the exception with the Texans down that for the stretch run. They really did lean into Devin Singletary. But before that, every time we thought like, oh man, this guy might actually be about to do it, it was like, oh no, we're going to give the ball to Zach Moss now. So he's a guy we've got to be careful with, but I definitely think for like the first month of the season, he's going to have a really large workload.
I will say, guys, you start looking at the career numbers between Devin Singletary and obviously the longtime Giants workhorse RB1 Saquon Barkley. Singletary hasn't beat. And yes, I have checked out the A+ defenders in the box. It was Saquon at 38%, Singletary at 28%. I'm fully aware that, who's the better NFL talent? It's Saquon Barkley. Who are defenses paying more attention to? It is Saquon Barkley. But Dwayne, if we can even get 90% of who Saquon is in the form of Singletary with the similar Saquon role, again, that's where I think we're unearthing a bit of a fantasy gem here. So last year, the Giants actually tied the Buccaneers in terms of the highest percentage of games where they were willing to give one single running back at least 80% of the snaps. And when you start going back in time to Devin Singletary's previous history with Brian Dable and some of those years where, again, not exactly blowing up fantasy, but at least playing the big majority of snaps and racking up 15 to 20 touches per game. Yeah, wouldn't be shocked if we do see Singletary going out there and hopefully giving you some solid utilization from someone that, again, you drafted in the double-digit rounds more times than not, as it was. All right, Dwayne, another running back, someone who I've been gushing about plenty. He was one of my, bold calls, top 5 player for next season, James Conner. Will he hit 15-plus fantasy points per game again in 2024? Because, Dwayne, not too much competition looking like is going on in Arizona right now.
Yeah, 15.5 fantasy points per game last year, 15.6 in 2022, and 15.1 in 2021. So James Conner, we don't think of him as one of these really, explosive playmakers. Like, he's not going to give you a ton of highlight reel runs, but he is a guy, Ian, that when you look up at the end of the season every year, you're like, he was an above average NFL runner, right? And that's what I would call him. But he's really good in all facets of the game. He's great as a receiver out of the backfield. Now, he's not like a second level guy like our CMCs and, Eckler and guys like that. But he is someone that you can get the ball to. He's going to be able to do a little bit in the passing game as well. So I think the big thing here is early season production, I feel great about. It's if he gets dinged up, if he misses time, and that door opens for Trey Benson, who the team invested a 3rd-round pick in. He is an explosive young back. So right now, I've got Trey Benson getting around 25, 26%, of the rush share for this team. And I've got, a little over 60% going to a little bit under 60% right now for James Conner. But what I'll say is last year, 61%, of the team's rushing attempts, and he still had that 15.5 fantasy points per game. So there's a chance this team actually gives a little bit more than I have Trey Benson projected for. Let's say they give him like 30% of the work, and James Conner could still be, right around that 55 to 58%, giving the rest obviously to Kyler Murray, who's going to get some of the design rushing attempts as well. He had 15%, last season over that last 8-game stretch when he came back from an injury. So even if Trey Benson takes on a little bit more of the workload, I think that James Conner, where you're getting him relative to his price in fantasy drafts right now, I do think that he's going to pay off that price tag. And I do think in week 1, he's probably going to get even more of the work. Like, I would be pretty surprised. I mean, anything could happen, but I think week 1, like, he's going to be a borderline running back 1 for me. Now, if Trey Benson comes out and looks really good and takes some of that work, that is the risk. So another player I think looks really good early, but I think as the season goes on, I do think there's a little bit of risk with James Conner because of the younger player.
He missed 10 games over the past 3 years, but so did Derrick Henry, so did Breece Hall. CMC missed 11. Kyron Williams has missed 12 in his 2-year career. Jonathan Taylor, 13 missed games over these past 3 seasons. So yes, Conner, I'll admit, a little bit more injury prone, quote unquote, than your younger running backs out there, but not the only guy dealing with these injuries. And Dwain, as much as Benson could, take on a larger role, like that is a possibility. I do think sometimes people go out there and they assume just because a player is going to get injured means they're going to be, missing the entire second half of the year. Whereas with Conner, we've seen him get hurt, miss these 3-4 week stretches, and then come back. Like, he's been there for every game of the fantasy playoffs over these past 2 years. He's ripped off RB12, RB4, RB15, RB11, and then back-to-back RB4 fantasy finishes over these past 2 seasons when it's mattered most in the fantasy playoffs. So just from a pure projection standpoint, I mean, this really is someone who, when again, you're looking at season-long rankings versus where we're actually moving them up in the week 1. I mean, Dwain, I know you're getting your rankings done today, but he's got to be top 10 in terms of just raw week 1 projections, right?
I don't know if he's top 10, but he's definitely in
knocking
the top.
On the door.
He's knocking on the door of running back 1 territory. For week 1, like, I just did the projections this weekend, so those are going live on the site today. I've got James Conner right now for week 1, like right around 60% of the team's rushing attempts. Like, I'm playing it a tad cautious just because of the Trey Benson thing, but again, like, I couldn't go give him 70%, but I feel pretty good about 60%. And if he gets that, he's going to be a borderline running back 1. I do think he'll get all the work inside the 5-yard line. I think he's going to get all the critical pass down work. I think Trey Benson is going to come in and fill in for him like every third drive. But when you get to those key snaps, probably coming off the field for James Conner. So again, it's one of those deals where you'd love to see a 65% snap share, but guys, just so you know, like 65% snap share, 70% for a running back is elite. It's phenomenal. 60% is really good. That's typically where a lot of your running back 1s reside. In fact, like the average NFL team, their number 1 running back gets 57% of the carries. Right. So just kind of keep that as context in your mind. So when you hear something like James Conner, man, only getting nearly 60% of the carries, that's not good. No, that's really good. When you hear beat reporters or you hear certain accounts are like, oh, I'm projecting like a 60-40. They just throw that number out there. Like 60-40 almost never happens. Like 60% is above the NFL average for, the teams that are out there. So yeah, with James Conner, borderline running back 1, Ian.
Love having Dwain in charge of our projections, which again, another big advantage of subscribing to Fantasy Life Plus if you're into that kind of thing. So more utilization talk ahead, everyone. But first, a quick word to our friends over at DraftKings. Hey everyone, with the football season kicking off, it is the perfect time to dive into the action with our partners over at DraftKings, the #1 place to bet on touchdowns. And right now, all new customers who bet $5 will instantly get $250 in bonus bets and 1 month of NFL Plus Premium on us. That is something we can all celebrate. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app today and sign up using our promo code FANTASYLIFE. The crown is yours. And stay in on the action. Use your $250 in bonus bets to bet anytime touchdowns on DraftKings. DraftKings is the place to bet touchdowns. If sports betting is not yet available in your state, don't worry. You can still join in on all the fun with DraftKings Daily Fantasy and have a shot to win cash prizes. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now, and new customers use our promo code FANTASYLIFE and bet just $5 on any wager to get $250 back in bonus bets instantly and that handy-dandy 1 month of NFL Plus Premium on us. That's promo code FANTASYLIFE only at DraftKings Sportsbook. The crown is yours. All right, Dwayne, let's talk, a certain wide receiver who I know we have both drafted quite a bit this offseason. We drafted him quite a bit last offseason, the one before that, every single year. And lo and behold, we cannot stop drafting Diontae Johnson. So looking at Diontae, new year, new Diontae, and new offense and new quarterback too. Are you thinking we're about to see Diontae get an elite level target share? And could he be someone where, again, you've drafted him as almost a borderline wide receiver 3 on more fantasy providers than not? But hey, if we get through week 1 and all of a sudden we see 10, 11, 12 targets, could be someone that is in, our top 15 at the position sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I mean, Deontay Johnson is like the Moneyball meme, right? The idea of, you just want players that get on base. Like I'm sitting here, I'm talking to you, you're Billy. I'm like, Billy. The guy, he has a borderline wide receiver 1 target share. He has a wide receiver 1 air yard share. We're talking about this guy over the last 3 years. We're talking about a player that can get open underneath, intermediate. He might actually be able to go deep. Guess what, though? His one flaw, he has not had a good quarterback. By the time he got to Ben Roethlisberger, he was playing with someone that could Ben just couldn't get the ball downfield like he used to be able to do.
Post-elbow surgery.
Deontay Johnson. Exactly. Post elbow surgery, Ben. Then we have the situation where we go to Kenny Pickett. You had Mason Rudolph in the lineup. Now I get it. Folks are looking at it and they're like, yeah. And now you have Bryce Young. Well, Bryce Young was the number 1 pick overall, and we have seen quarterbacks of his, skill set actually improve drastically in year 2 when the team has gone out and made the sort of additions that we have seen the Carolina Panthers do, which, by the way, hat tip to them, because it's not like they had a ton of draft capital. They gave away a lot to go get Bryce Young. They went and got Xavier Legette in round 1. Obviously, they signed Diontae Johnson. They upgraded their guards on the interior of the offensive line. They added Jonathan Brooks, who eventually be getting on the field. So this is just an offense that's going to look a lot different, right? We've got Canales coming over, so this is going to be a whole new scheme. I do love Diontae Johnson this season, Ian. I think he is a sneaky candidate to have 150 to 160 targets in fantasy land. And if Bryce Young even just becomes below average, guys, not saying he's got to suddenly turn into this elite player, that's still in his range of outcomes as well. If he just turns into a below average quarterback, Diontae Johnson is going to be a mid-range wide receiver 2 very quickly. And people are going to realize the error in their ways, Ian, letting this man fall so far in fantasy drafts.
He does have that wide receiver 8 season to his name on a per game basis. So it's not like we haven't seen the wide receiver 1 level upside. And to your point, Dwayne, 124 target projection. And that honestly feels conservative, which is a good thing. I mean, it is a good thing you're doing our projections, not me, because we would be going way more,
having like
aggressive.
170.
Yeah, I'd be like, well, who cares? Has to happen to lost Diontae Johnson out here. But again, even that number is 18th among wide receivers, right there with Cooper Kupp, Rashee Rice, and Nico Collins, 3 guys who certainly are going well ahead of Diontae in fantasy drafts of all shapes and sizes. So Diontae Johnson, someone you can get as your wide receiver 4 or 5 often enough. Really, really liking what we could see from him in 2024 and hopefully beyond. Dwayne, let's talk about a tight end who, I don't know about you, but I haven't exactly made the biggest habit of drafting. And it's not so much about him. We just, like really getting into the more elite onesies, the Mark Andrews, the Trey McBrides, the Kyle Pitts of the world. But Evan Engram, do you think he could have sneaky top 3 upside? Because, man, you start looking at the numbers last year and 143 targets for a tight end. You don't exactly see that every day.
Yeah, so I really like Evan Engram. I think he is a talented player. Obviously, he was a first-round NFL draft pick. Giants, do you guys still need a tight end? Because you let one go that's sitting over here with Jacksonville. Now we do have Doug Peterson, as you like to call him, the tight end whisperer. This is a guy that, has definitely unlocked some potential. But at the same time, I think he also just knows how to get good tight ends on his team. I mean, he had Zach Ertz and freaking Dallas Goedert before. He had 2 of them, in Philly. So it's probably also just Doug Peterson saying, hey, guys, talking to the GM, I'd like to have a good tight end on my team because I want to feature them in my passing attack. So the one challenge I have with Evan Engram, Ian, last year, it really was good. If you look at it, just pure numbers, overall 8.2 targets per game last season. That is really fantastic for a tight end. But a lot of it happened once Christian Kirk was out of the lineup. And that is the main thing that really gets me concerned. So if we look at his target shares, once we got to week 13 with Christian Kirk gone, 24%, 27%, 14%. And man, he poured it on week 16, 17, and 18, 36%, 29%, and 33%. So here's the thing. There's positives and there's negatives to this. The positive is, like, once the other player was off the field, Evan Engram was good enough to still go get all of those targets, because guess what? The defense also knows this, guys. They're now without Christian Kirk. They don't have to defend him. The replacement player for Christian Kirk is not as good, and he was still able to go earn those targets. So that tells us that Evan Engram does have the talent that we're looking for. The challenge is, now we're going to have Christian Kirk in the lineup on week 1, and they frequent the same area of the field. They're both guys that work in the intermediate middle portion of the field. So they're essentially battling each other for targets. And quite often, Trevor Lawrence is going to be reading the way that those defenders are playing them to decide which guy he's throwing to. Now, we do have Calvin Ridley gone. We just talked about Calvin Ridley earlier. Calvin Ridley did a really nice job last year, even though it was sporadic fantasy production. He still earned his targets. So there's a chance Brian Thomas Jr., as much as we love him, like if Brian Thomas Jr. comes out and does everything Calvin Ridley did last year, I think we would both say that's a very successful rookie campaign, Ian. But there's a chance he doesn't. So if Brian Thomas Jr. can't do what Calvin Ridley was doing, there is still potential upside to this thing getting narrowed down more to really 2 guys, because Gabe Davis, we know, look, Gabe Davis, NFL player, can stretch the field, but we know he's not going to earn a lot of targets, guys. He just never has. He already had his chance. Buffalo needed him to do that, and he was not able to turn into that caliber of player. So I think it comes down to Brian Thomas Jr. and what is he in this offense. If he can equal what Calvin Ridley did, Evan Engram might be a trap right now in fantasy football. If he doesn't equal what we saw from Calvin Ridley last year, Evan Engram could be an absolute steal. So here, how about me just tossing it to you and saying, I don't know. Like Evan Engram, he's kind of interesting because he could be either one of these things.
I mean, last year you look at it, and Ingram only had 4 targets inside the 10-yard line. Zay Jones had 5. Calvin Ridley had freaking 13. So that's where the upside scenario is for Kirk and Ingram alike. Like, who is going to be that featured guy in the red zone? And again, Dwayne, one of the reasons I haven't been loading up on Ingram is because I think they used the first-round pick on Brian Thomas. I think they paid $30 million plus to Gabe Davis to get those bigger body wide receivers and for them to be their weapons near the goal line. But again, maybe it is just Evan Engram. Certainly looked like that was going to be a role that could be increasing when he scored those 2 first-half touchdowns in his lone extended preseason appearance. So we'll see what happens. But yeah, Doug Peterson, tight end whisperer, has been with some good tight ends from Kelsey to Ertz to Goddard and now to Evan Engram. The Jims and Joes certainly helps the X's and O's in that predicament. But yeah, biggest thing for me, Dwayne, are those Christian Kirk splits that you mentioned. Last year, 7.7 half PPR points per game in 11 games with Kirk, 15.5 in 5 games without. So hopefully, as a whole, we just see T-Law start living up to that generational label. And again, from that perspective, should be enough meat on the bone for all parties involved to be eaten. Now, Dwayne, going to do a bit of a rapid fire. Who would you kind of rather pick here situation? So when I'm talking about better target share, who would you rather have between Puka Nacua and Brandon Ayuk?
Puka Nacua, Puka Nacua, Puka Nacua. Like, no contest. Puka Nacua is going to probably out-target Brandon Ayuk by 10 percentage points. It might be less. It might be like 6 or 7. I could be getting excited. Ayuk is a great player. He just has more target competition. You got to deal with Kittle. You got to deal with Debo. CMC is like a damn receiver out of the backfield, so that's a challenge.
Last year, Puka 28%, Ayuk 23%, although Ayuk did lead the way in air yard target share. But yeah, it certainly seems like this is Puka's race to lose. Who has more carries inside the 5-yard line, Dwayne? James Cook or Ramondre Stevenson?
Oh my gosh, this is like a trick question, because the question is like, is James Cook going to actually get carries on his team? We know they're going to be inside the 5 all the time to the Bills, right? So if they decide to give him some of those, he's clearly leading this, but he only had 21% of the team's carries inside the 5 last year, and they didn't use him that way the year before either. They add Ray Davis, and the big thing is Josh Allen. I mean, you could use Josh Allen like Jalen Hurts and just tush push and probably score all the time. So the flip side is Ramondre Stevenson. Like, how many times are the Patriots going to get inside the 5-yard line this year? I don't think it's going to be very many. So I'm going to say it's James Cook. I'm going to say James Cook goes from being a 20% inside the 5 player to 40% this year. And that's enough to be better than Ramondre, who gets 70% on the Patriots.
Last year, Josh Allen had 14 carries inside the 5. That was the 7th most in the NFL. But even with that, Bills running back still had 18 carries at the goal line. Dwayne, how many do you think the Patriots had all year, running backs?
7.
Wow. Nailed it. But yeah, 18 versus 7. No more Latavius Murray. So if James Cook can even get 30, 40% of that, certainly could be beating out Mondre. I am with you there. Last one, Dwayne. This is a tough one. Who has the better air yard target share, Xavier Worthy, or just talking about him, Brian Thomas Jr.?
I'm going to give it to Worthy. He just looks like he has something in him that like might be completely unguardable in Andy Reid's offense with Patrick Mahomes. That's the differentiator. I think Doug Peterson is a below average offensive coordinator. I think Andy Reid is one of the best. I really like Trevor Lawrence, but we're hoping, to your point, he takes the next step to pay off being that number 1 overall pick. I already know it with Patrick Mahomes. Patrick Mahomes can buy time. He can survey the field. He can hit you on the scramble drill. And man, he's so quick. He's so quick with the trigger. Like as soon as he sees that last glance, like he sees Worthy, he can quickly get off his first read and get over to this guy. So I think Xavier Worthy is going to lead in air yards. I think Xavier Worthy surprises everyone and finishes as a top 24 fantasy wide receiver as a rookie.
So excited to, again, get some real hard data for the utilization report this time next week. And Dwayne, one thing we're going to make a habit of doing every Tuesday, yes, focusing on the present waiver wire here today, but also projecting maybe who could be on the cover of waiver wire articles next week. And, for right now, we're talking about week 2. So for you, Dwayne, looking at guys, under 50% ESPN ownership, who do you think could be standing out after week 1 of action as the must-have waiver wire commodity?
Well, I thought you did a pretty good job of just putting together a list before the show. And we've been drafting a ton together over the last 2 weeks. And these are a lot of names that we've been targeting in deeper drafts. And just so you guys know, Ian and I were in drafts where you're going 20 rounds, right? And you have to start 2 flex players as well. So Jaleel McLaughlin, I think, is a great one out of Denver, Ian, especially if you drafted early. If you drafted this last weekend, there's a chance he went in your draft because all the hype around him has gained steam, but it wasn't there 2 weeks ago. So he could get half the backfield work. Like that's the ceiling for him. He could get half the backfield work in Denver. I think worst case, Ian, he's probably getting 25% of the rushing attempts, and he's taking the 2-minute offense away from Javonte Williams, which we've kind of seen Sean Payton running backs in that mold in the past, guys. Not trying to squint we get with Jaleel McLaughlin. So I would say he would be one of the big names for me. Wide receiver, I would say A.D. Mitchell would be the big one for me. Just looks so good in preseason, man. And I don't know why he's not going closer to Ladd McConkey in fantasy drafts.
Some of those other names, and yeah, Jaleel would be my highlighted player, but Rico Dowdle, potential Cowboys one, still well under 50%. Never understood his kind of ranking placement over at ESPN. Antonio Gibson, no, not the sexiest offense, but if we do see that split a bit closer, wouldn't be surprised at all if he is someone we're recommending. Jordan Mason, the 49ers RB2, and Bucky Irving, someone Dwayne and I have been shouting out for weeks now with a real potential to, again, maybe shrink that total volume that Rachaad White is getting. In addition to, again, maybe A.D. Mitchell at wide receiver. Rashid Shaheed looking like the clear-cut number 2 in New Orleans. Khalil Shakir maybe rises to the top of a muddled Buffalo Bills wide receiver room. And don't forget about those Packers, Romeo Doubs and Dontavian Wicks in the sort of passing game that we want plenty of exposure to. So last one, Taysom Hill at tight end, guys. If we see him go out there and actually be the goal line back, getting 8+ carries and a couple of targets, I don't know why he's a tight end, but you know what, Dwayne? Don't hate the player, hate the fantasy provider, I guess. And Taysom Hill at tight end might just be a thing. So that's going to wrap up this edition of the Fantasy Life Show. Guess what? We'll be back tomorrow, Thursday and Friday, all throughout the season, 9 a.m. Eastern, Monday through Friday overall. But yeah, guys, talking again, some finally week 1 actual matchup previews here tomorrow. So make sure you come back and yeah, good luck otherwise. So for Dwayne, for producer Matt, for producer Kelsey, I'm Ian. Thanks again for tuning to the Fantasy Life Show. And until next time, take care, everybody.